Namaste and greetings. I, Ritika Sundar, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Ivamniti Anusandhan Sansthan, Delhi, warmly welcome you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here for a distinguished lecture on the topic Recent Developments in West Asia, Challenges for Indian Diplomacy by Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. This talk is a part of the series, The State of International Affairs, #Diplomacy Dialogue, which is organized by IMPRI, Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. Today, I deem it my honor to introduce the speaker. Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed served as an Indian ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE. He was Additional Secretary for International Cooperation in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas between 2004 and 2006, and Director General of the Indian Council of World Affairs, New Delhi, between 2006 and 7. Following retirement from Foreign Service in 2011 and a 4-year stint in the corporate sector in Dubai, he is now a full-time academic and holds the Ram Sathe Chair for International Studies at Symbiosis International University in Pune. He writes regularly on issues relating to political Islam, the politics of West Asia, Eurasia, and the Indian Ocean, and energy security. Welcome, sir. We're fortunate to have a distinguished discussant for today's deliberation. Welcome, sir. Professor A.K. Pasha teaches at the Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where he has served as chairperson and is now director of Gulf Studies. He has also been director of the Maulana Azad Center for Indian Culture in Cairo, Egypt. He has authored, edited, and co edited, as well as contributed chapters to over 60 books published in India and in the Gulf, West Asia, and North Africa. His research articles have been published in numerous national and international journals. After graduating from St. Philomena's College in Mysore, he obtained MA degrees in Middle Eastern Studies and Political Science from Mysore University. MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has previously taught at the Center for West Asian Studies, Aligarh Muslim University in India. He had been a research fellow at the Faculty of Economics and Political Science in Cairo University in Egypt. He's associated with Gulf Research Center in Dubai, UAE. His research, teaching, and writing focused on West Asia and North Africa. He is on the editorial board of several national and international journals. He's a frequent commentator and analyst on international affairs, especially on West Asian and North African issues for radio and TV in India and abroad. We look forward to learning from a distinguished speaker and eminent panelist, and we look forward to an enriching deliberation. With that, I invite Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI, New Delhi, and the moderator for today's session to take over. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome. Thank you, Ritika, for leading us into the discussion today. The West Asian region, as some of us know, has for long been the locus of waves of volatility and instability. Countries there have actually withered a lot. They have withered autocratic regimes to springs and aspirations of democratic systems, international sanctions to civil wars, extremism, sectarianism, and violence of incredible proportions. So what are the socio-political, economic, and strategic trends that are unfolding in West Asia? How do these impact India, given that India considers West Asia as its extended neighborhood? What are the best options for India to enhance the existing relations with West Asian region in a much more frequent and a meaningful manner? So to discuss all these and beyond, our distinguished speaker, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, will take us through, and our distinguished discussant, Professor A.K. Pasha, would take us through. So thank you so much, and I welcome you. I also welcome all our participants. Without any further ado, I would invite Ambassador Ahmad for his lecture. Sir, it's all yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. In the short time that we have with us, I will not give details of what is happening, but just indicate the main points. When we look at West Asia today, just over 6 months after President Biden has been in the White House, we note that we who are observers of West Asia and those who live in West Asia are still recovering from the trauma of the presidency that just went earlier, the Trump presidency. Very rarely has a president does so much damage to one particular region with his ill thought out and impetuous actions. But he is actually speaking in a long line of extremely destructive interventions that the Americans have perpetrated in this region. A massive assault upon Afghanistan after 9/11, with no planning as to what would happen the day after the Taliban regime had been ended. And that began a 20-year presence for the Americans, loss of a few thousand troops, but the actual killing of several thousand, several hundred thousand Afghans, and with so much money being spent in that country, nothing to show in terms of what they achieved. Similarly, they assaulted Iraq. It is still unclear as to what the presidential purpose was. We know that he was under tremendous pressure from the neocons, the extreme right-wing pro-Israel lobby in the country that had been extremely anxious for war against Iraq. And yes, the war did happen. Massive destruction occurred. 400,000 Iraqis were killed. And yet the Americans never realized, what are we doing here? So this kind of extremely ill thought out, peremptory interventions, usually military interventions, have marked the American presence in that country. But with Donald Trump, you have the extraordinary, you recall, a very robust intervention in order to expand the fault lines in the country as actively as possible. He was emotionally involved, and I would add, financially involved with Saudi Arabia, and was fostering a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran and Israel, and was viscerally hostile to the Iranians and peremptorily withdrew the United States from the agreement. Of course, now when you look at the United States, the legacy is very clear. United States is a significantly diminished presence in the global world order. And as of now, it appears that the president would like to disengage from West Asia. Again, here, President Biden is in the long tradition of earlier US presidents who usually begin their presidency with wanting to have nothing to do with West Asia, and then they find that they get involved more and more deeply as the months and years pass by, with very little ability to do anything useful or constructive. We are at the early stage. But what has happened is that the region seems to have read the American policy quite well. After the serious damage that was wreaked upon the region by Donald Trump, not only by his actions, but also by his omissions, the region has started thinking about ways in which they can pursue their interests without the involvement of the Americans. As we speak about the disengagement of the Americans, we must also note that over the last few years, very quietly but very significantly, two major role players have emerged in the region as well, and they are Russia and China. And they have today expanded their presence. And I would say to you that they are looking at reworking the global order over a period of time that would enmesh all of Eurasia. So there is this presence. And the third point is the various conflicts that have occurred and the interventions that have taken place. If you were to now look at the map of West Asia, North Africa, you would have to admit that this region's security, its security landscape is integrated. You do not have any longer that tripartite division of the Gulf, West Asia, and North Africa. Gulf countries are involved in West Asia in the case of the Syrian conflict. You have Iran as well as Saudi Arabia intervening in Syria. You have UAE and Egypt intervening in Libya. You have both UAE and Saudi Arabia, as also Qatar, deeply involved with Afghanistan. So you have a situation where the security landscape is connected. In this background, what has been happening recently? Let us go very quickly and note the points as we go along. Just as the Biden presidency was beginning its term, Saudi Arabia rapidly ended the siege of Qatar. You have this had been in place from 2017. It had been largely encouraged by the total support given to Saudi Arabia by Donald Trump. And Saudi Arabia, allied with the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, had thought it a golden opportunity to put pressure upon their small neighbor and to get it to mend its ways. At that time, obviously, Qatar had come into their bad books because it was talking about ending the confrontation with Iran, bringing Iran into the regional space, as also this hostility against Muslim Brotherhood. It was opposed to. It was opposed to that. Obviously, that siege did not work because instead of putting pressure upon the Qataris, both Iran and Turkey rapidly came to the assistance of Qatar, as also the fact that Oman and Kuwait were not involved with the siege was at the end of the day quite meaningless. But as the presidency of Biden emerged, Saudi Arabia felt that this hopeless business should end, and they withdrew from the siege. The UAE has also formally withdrawn, but it still exhibits a certain degree of unhappiness because the siege was ended without Qatar actually indicating any change in regard to its regional approach or its ideological affinity with the Brotherhood. There is another news that has come to us that from April onwards, there have been secret conversations between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We know that certain meetings have taken place in Baghdad. We are also told that meetings have taken place in Oman. There have been hints that they could be discussing the way forward in Yemen and the restoration of diplomatic ties. Not much seems to have happened so far. My own impression is that the two countries were possibly waiting to see what would be the attitude of the Biden administration to the two of them. And I think the message is now quite loud and clear. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, Biden can't bear the sight of the crown prince and wants to have nothing to do with him. Is a rather emotional approach. It is as emotional as that of Donald Trump, but in the opposite direction. And he has made it very clear that he is going to scrutinize Saudi Arabia's human rights record. He wants to end the war in Yemen. He could even deny Saudi Arabia certain weaponry, and he doesn't want to talk to the crown prince at all. From the Iranian side, we had the impression, indeed, Biden had given us this impression that as soon as he comes into the White House, he is going to rejoin the nuclear agreement. But that has not happened. The reality check has already occurred. As he came into the White House, he realized he just has 4 years to go and he wants to focus on his domestic agenda first. And for that, he needs a degree of national consensus in a country that is so deeply polarized. And therefore, he put Iran on the back burner and focused on the relief to be given in order to combat the pandemic, and then he started focusing on the infrastructure bill at home. He has said, and many of his officials have said, that their priority is China and the handling of relations with the allies, and that the Middle East or West Asia, as we call it here, is not a priority for the Biden administration. Well and good. But West Asia has the habit of biting you when you least expect it, and therefore you had the violence in Gaza and in East Jerusalem. The Americans had to get into it, they had no choice, but really they conducted themselves exactly as they did earlier, and that was to give the Israelis a very long rope, allow them to wreak as much violence as was possible on the Palestinians, both their own citizens as well as in Gaza. And after more than 200 people had been killed, a certain ceasefire was engineered not by the Americans but by the Egyptians with the help of the Qataris. So we have yet to see which way they are likely to go. But there has been something even more interesting that happened as Trump was going into the election, as he was going into the election. In the month of August last year, UAE suddenly and dramatically announced that it was normalizing diplomatic ties with Israel. And soon thereafter, over the next few weeks, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco are also said to have joined. We don't know more. Sudan has been a bit half-hearted. They were allured with the prospect of getting out of the terrorism list that the Americans had made. The Americans abruptly removed them because they needed something else from them, and they also gave $1 billion in economic assistance. As far as Morocco is concerned, the Americans attempted to win them over in support of their agenda by saying that they recognize Western Sahara as an integral part of Morocco. None of this has been done by the American presidents earlier, and this is in line with Trump's activities as far as Israel is concerned, recognizing things that don't belong to him and are not under US jurisdiction. But this is the way they have done. My own assessment has been and remains that it was done, this normalization was done specifically in the context of the elections in order to boost the prospect of Donald Trump, and at the same time to boost the electoral prospects of Netanyahu as well, who then looked pretty ugly because he was facing all these cases in court because of corruption, fraud, and misconduct, etc. So a normalization has occurred, even as the embassy has opened in the two countries concerned. As far as UAE concerned, it is still in Tel Aviv. But Saudi Arabia, there was a tremendous pressure imposed upon Saudi Arabia to come on board, but the kingdom obviously has a much larger constituency as compared to these other countries and could not pluck up the courage to, to commit this gross travesty in the region. So normalization has occurred. People say that this normalization is only bringing into the public space what was already happening behind the scenes as far as UAE is concerned, and possibly even Saudi Arabia. And it is part of the UAE wanting to build ties with the Israel lobby in the United States, look good in the US, regardless of who is in the White House, and because of the lobby that is there, and to have some lucrative trade engagements and technology cooperation arrangements as well. But something more interesting has happened as far as Israel is concerned. Even as Netanyahu thought that he would be prime minister for life, he was abruptly removed from this position. And a new government has come in. This government has got right-wing elements in the shape of the prime minister, Bennett Naftali, but it also has centrist and leftist elements, and it is supported by the Arab list in the Knesset as well. It's a unique development. After several years, indeed a few decades, you have this arrangement, because otherwise Israeli politics has been dominated by the right wing. Today, this government has several firsts. After a long time, it's the first government without Netanyahu in more than 12 years. It is the first government that does not have religious parties in the coalition. As you know, Israel's religious parties are extremely aggressive, extremely demanding, and indeed provide the ballast for the hostility and violence perpetrated by that country against the Palestinians. The third is that it is backed by the Arab list. We agree that we know that this is a shaky coalition, but they are all making an effort to keep the government going. And if that is indeed the case and it consolidates itself, my own sense is that regardless of the context in which normalization took place, there could be some prospect of change in the Israeli attitude in not months to come, but certainly a few years. You have to accept the fact that while Israel by law is a Jewish state that privileges one particular community over the others, it is also a democratic state, and it has a 20% Arab community that are its citizens. And also, you have to come up with policies which would enable you to address the needs and concerns of those millions of people in the occupied territory. So you could have. I don't want to be overly optimistic at this early stage, nor have I got too many hints from Tel Aviv just yet, but I would like to believe that at some stage there could be a new attitude. This would reflect a new generation of Israelis. There is a new generation of American Jews who are less enamored of the right wing politics of Israel. And indeed, I have read very distinguished people saying that time has now come for Israel to give up the Zionist project with which it has been impelled for so long and become a normal state that would accommodate different people with who have its citizenship and also work with the peace process. This kind of xenophobia that has impelled Israel up to now could become diluted largely under the pressure of these new people who have come. I also have a stray thought, and this thought is that the Israelis, throughout their existence, have been taught to despise the Arab, to hate the Arab, and to despise the Arab. It's a very racist connotation. But as they engage with the Arabs, you know that in the last few months, 200,000 Israelis have actually visited the UAE as tourists and as businessmen. Over a period of time, as the Israelis deal with normal Arabs, Arabs who are well educated, Arabs who are professionally qualified, Arabs who are affluent, who live in cities that are better than many American cities and European cities in terms of infrastructure, they could realize that this Arab is not a demon and that there is a possibility of a balanced engagement with the Arab so that over a period of time you could ease the relationship with the people in the occupied territories and see how you can learn to live together with each other. Another interesting thing that has happened in the last few months is that Turkey, which had such an aggressive posture in the region, has opened dialogue both with Egypt and with Saudi Arabia. Turkey is a complex presence in the region. Initially, it started as wanting to have zero problems, then its problems continued to mount as it got involved with regional politics and then of course it got more further involved because of the problems it had with the Kurds. So now it has a military presence in both Iraq and in Syria because it is combating the aspirations of the Kurdish people. But it has also done another thing. It has reached across the Mediterranean into Libya and on the basis of its Muslim Brotherhood affiliation has worked with the government in Tripoli to obtain a maritime agreement that would extend its claims in the East Mediterranean. This has put Turkey in conflict with Greece and Cyprus, European Union countries, and has created a degree of tension in the region. Are we now looking at the possibility of Turkey revising its approach to the region, becoming a little more accommodative, working with countries like Egypt and with Saudi Arabia? Neither so far. The meetings have already taken place, high profile meetings, but neither Egypt nor Saudi Arabia have yet shown enthusiasm. The main reason is that Turkey is still affiliated with political Islam, and its politics is run on the basis of support for the ideology and ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood, both of which are anathema as far as Cairo and Riyadh are concerned. But at least the dialogue has occurred. We don't see much change as far as its policies in Iraq, in Syria and Iraq are concerned. But I have simply to flag the point that there is the hint of a change which may go forward. Egypt had been in the doghouse for very long, ever since it had conducted the coup d'état against Morsi and had a breakdown in its economy. It had been crucially dependent on Saudi Arabia as well as on the UAE. Now seems to be asserting itself and claiming a place in the major developments in the region. It played a significant role in bringing about a ceasefire in Gaza, for instance. So that is a very important point, and it has given a certain profile to Field Marshal Sisi that he did not have before. Also, Turkey has reached out to him, well and good. You also see that he had gone to Baghdad, and Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan have announced a new partnership of these three countries. If you look at the map, they are near contiguous. They bring a lot of strengths to the table between themselves. They have assets, and they are putting together a paradigm of cooperation outside any American involvement and outside any Gulf involvement. Each of them, for different reasons, wants to pursue an independent foreign policy that is not beholden either to big powers like the Americans or to the Gulf powers. And I think this is a fascinating development. They have called their initiative the creation of a new Levant of the region, a new opening in the region. But Egypt has also become active in African affairs. It has a problem with Ethiopia on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And because of that, it has very actively reached out to set up defense and economic agreements with various countries that surround Ethiopia. Till now, Egypt's interest used to be in West Asia rather than in Africa, and this is a significant change. And therefore, you will see over a period of time that it will not get its old place back because Saudi Arabia is already there as a rival. But having said this, over a period of time, it will start building together a certain space for itself, and a certain degree of respect will be extended to its leader. Here you will see the role or that Egypt has played in Libya. There have been a lot of pressures upon Libya to use its armed forces, but Egypt is very clear that though they are headed by a military officer, they don't want to involve their armed forces in any action, unlike Turkey. All the initiatives that the Egyptians have taken have been diplomatic in character. And it is their diplomats, very seasoned and well respected diplomats, they are the ones serving Egyptian interests rather than the armed forces. And finally, you have the situation relating to Afghanistan. There are questions asked because what has the traumatic events of recent days have forced us to reflect. One of the questions that has been put and is Afghanistan South Asian, Central Asian, or West Asian? Possibly it is all three, depending on what issue is at stake at any time. It is South Asian as a member of SARC and its close ties with India and Pakistan, are well known and well established. It is also Central Asian in the sense that it has a long border with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and indeed there is a to and fro movement all the time. It is part of West Asia because because its affairs for very long have been influenced by Gulf countries. Saudi Arabia was a very major player in the global jihad in the 1980s. It was also a major source of funding for the Taliban in the 1990s. And after 9/11, it has been a fairly important source of finance to the Pakistanis in order to keep the Taliban expanding their role in Afghanistan. Much of this is not well documented in the public space, but it has now emerged quite clearly in this regard. And therefore, there is a Saudi role. There is also a Qatari role. In 2012, Taliban opened their office in Doha because the Americans wanted to have a platform where they could have a dialogue with the Taliban. And I think Doha came forward. They are also affiliated with political Islam and therefore were possibly more comfortable with the Taliban than other countries in the region. Be that as it may, Qatar has played a very major role in seeing through the political process and the agreement with the Americans that has enabled them to pack their bags and run out of the country, something that they do so well after leaving behind such extraordinary damage. What does all this mean for India? Any any one of us who attempts to discuss India's interests and India's foreign policy has one very serious obstacle. That is that ever since Mr. Modi came back to power about in 2019, the interest of the government in foreign affairs has significantly diminished, and you find that their focus primarily is on the pursuit of their domestic agenda and the reworking of the idea of India in the image of their ideology. What you see, what passes for foreign policy is a near total absence of any vision or direction, but sporadic activities of the minister who is either found in one capital or the other, but it is an engagement that has no substance or direction. Having said this, let us look at the issues that are most important as far as India is concerned. Top of the list would be Afghanistan. Afghanistan, we don't know what is going to happen. There is a brewing civil conflict, how serious it will be, whether it will match the Northern Alliance led by Ahmad Shah Massoud. You see the presence of his son, and you also see some of the old people, Amrullah Saleh, in this outfit. Are they well armed? Do they have the capacity to fight for a certain period of time? Who are the people behind them? None of this is well known to us. My own assessment, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn or prematurely, my own sense is that I can't bring myself to take this seriously. What Afghanistan needs is not another civil conflict. What it needs is a degree of good strength where you can put together a truly moderate government that brings in different factions. Initially, I was encouraged by the fact that Taliban representatives were actually meeting Karzai, as also Abdullah, Salauddin Rabbani, Mutaqi, etc. So it encouraged me that they are widening their engagement, and possibly this could yield a moderate and cohesive order for the country. Once you have any kind of government in Kabul, what will be its approach to the country? What are the values it will bring? What will be its attitude to women, minorities, education? None of this is known to us. We have a long way to go in that regard. We also need to know what will be its attitude with regard to extremist elements. In the 1990s, we know that it had a very powerful symbiotic relationship with Al Qaeda. Indeed, it was this relationship that had got the Americans to assault the Emirates after 9/11. Will they go back to that? And now, then all of this leads to the last thought relating to Afghanistan is it's a landlocked country. It cannot survive for a day without having relationships and openings with its neighbor. Whatever the background of any government, it has to take care of the interests of its people. Economic development has to be high on its priority list. We don't know which way it will go. There is a lot of attention paid to Pakistan. And my own sense is that Pakistan, on the one hand, might be pleased that the Taliban have finally succeeded in getting rid of the Americans. But then there is this other question. How strong do you want the Taliban to be? So far, Pakistan has maintained tight control over the Taliban. But even then, there are sections within the Taliban who run an independent approach, who have an independent approach. Once they are in power, what kind of dependence will be there on Pakistan? What kind of, to what extent will Pakistan be allowed to influence their affairs? If you were sitting in Islamabad or Rawalpindi today, one would have every reason to be concerned because you have a soft border, massive movement of people on both sides. If there is a conflict situation, lots of people will cross the border for sanctuary into Pakistan. You could also have extremist elements fomenting extremism within Pakistan and creating disturbances for that country. And you would have, therefore, Pakistan has every reason for caution. I cannot imagine a responsible government in Islamabad countenancing the return of extremist elements within that country. So let us leave here. We know that there are China and Russia have been active role players, occasionally in front, but mostly behind the scenes. What influence will they carry with this administration? They have made some Taliban leaders have made some positive noises about China. China has also promised to invest in Afghanistan and develop the country, but China will put its money only if there is stability. Therefore, it will insist that the region be stable before it starts building its roads and bridges and railways. We will have to wait and see. The next issue we have to look at, and I see that as a significant challenge for India, is dealing with Iran. India has consistently, for the last 20 years, subordinated its relations with Iran to our ties with the Americans. And the Iranians know that. Many of the promises made earlier to pursue ties with Iran have been dropped by the wayside by the Indians. Recently, there is a spurt of activity. This is what I called activity as an end in itself with no strategy or direction, is to reach out to Tehran and to see if we can take we can do certain things together. Do recall here that the agreement that the Iranians had with us with regard to the development of Chabahar was in 2003, 10 years before Belt and Road was even dreamt of by Xi Jinping. We did nothing at all about that. All the connectivity projects that we have spoken about have remained on paper. Even when Mr. Modi visited Iran and did the tripartite agreement on Chabahar and the connection with Afghanistan, we didn't do anything at all because within a year, Trump had come into the White House. If you were sitting in Tehran, you would be a little skeptical about these Indian overtures. I also need to mention that Iran was very badly hit by the sanctions. Its people were deliberately starved and impoverished. Its children were denied medicine and food. Why could we not have done something useful at that time? We should have come forward to the Iranians and said, look, I know you are passing through hard times. Your middle class is getting impoverished. Here is something that India will do for you. But we didn't do anything. So now this relationship, you run to Tehran and try to see where you can take the relationship. The Chinese and Russians have been consistently there in Iran. They have built a relationship, political, defense, economic, a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. Details not known, but it's a 25-year agreement. So we have to take a look at that and see where it will go. Long ago, when I was more hopeful about the government, I used to talk about India playing a role in promoting regional security. The region needs a holistic approach. It has so many diverse issues in different places. Unless you have a regional security, cooperative regional security arrangement, you're never going to have peace in that region. And I had envisaged India leading such a diplomatic effort. I am now no longer that enthusiastic. I've written a lot about it. I've circulated my papers and proposals very extensively. But the way I look at the government, I'm not enthused. I'm, for example, let me end on this note that we have a senior minister who's a former diplomat who says that looking at the situation of Sikhs and Hindus in Afghanistan, we now know the justification for the Citizenship Amendment Act. Is the minister blind and deaf? He cannot see on the television screen hundreds of thousands of Afghan people suffering and very insecure about the future. And he can only mention two communities that have lived in Afghanistan for the last 400 years, seen enormous vicissitudes. They think of themselves as Afghan, and you suddenly think, so it is domestic agenda constantly trumping India's national interest, India's foreign policy, and India's standing in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It was very, very eloquent and very powerful thoughts that you have presented. So really, we have learned a lot. Thank you so much. We'll keep the questions for later. I would now invite Professor Aftab Kamal Pasha for his remarks. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ritika Sundar. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Please continue.
Okay. Thanks to the Institute, Impact and Policy Research Institute for inviting me and also for hosting a brilliant lecture by Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. Talmiz Ahmad Saab has been a veteran diplomat who has served in many West Asian countries, especially Gulf countries from Iraq to UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia for many, many years. And he has studied and researched on this region ever since he has been associated as an IFS officer. And I had the privilege of meeting him several times in the region while I was serving as a part-time diplomat for the ICCR in Cairo for the Indian Cultural Center. During one of my visits to Riyadh, not only he conducted his office work with meticulous interest and the mountains of files he would clear, but and also as a host, hosting many parties for dignitaries, etc. I also found him taking time to read books. He's a voracious reader, writer, and a very argumentative diplomat, I must say. He has brilliant ideas, very sharp views, very strong views also. And I found him extremely well-read, well-informed, and articulate. In this lecture, he has given us a wide canvas, starting with the wrongdoings of President Donald Trump, his destructive interventions, what he calls the robust military intervention in the region, in covered Afghanistan, Iraq, and the diminished US presence globally, and in particular, the West Asian region, taking us through the Abraham Accords, the normalization initiated through Israeli domestic politics to Turkish ambitions and Egypt's forays in Africa, and of course, the current Afghan situation and the lack of interest in Narendra Modi's second term as Prime Minister, or lack of substance or direction, as he calls it. And also we saw how Indian interests are intertwined and his focus on Iran, what we could have done and what we have achieved. And finally, his pet theme of security and stability and what India could have done and what he views it currently as far as India's engagement militarily or in the defense area is concerned. Having covered such a vast canvas from Iran to Morocco and from Turkey to Sudan, but I still feel there are some areas, given the limited time he had at his disposal, I broadly agree to his presentations, but I would flag some of the issues which participants or listeners would be interested, and then come down to a critique of his extensive presentation. In the last 1.5 years, the major problem which has bothered the people and the government has been the COVID pandemic, which has unnerved, like many other governments around the world, governments from Morocco to Iran, from Turkey to Sudan, almost 25 countries. It's a major, major challenge which has depleted economic resources of the oil-rich countries. It has badly affected non-oil producing countries' revenues, whether it is tourism in North Africa or the immigrant population which sends remittances. So the economic challenges which most of these states, including Israel, Turkey, and Iran, the three non-Arab countries, are enormous. And in my view, the socio-economic challenges flowing from this COVID pandemic and the way these governments have handled, we will be seeing it in a much bigger way in the coming months and years. I would link this to the 2008-9 economic global meltdown, especially the European countries who suffered enormously because of the changes, economic changes, downturn in America, how the economic problems, recession in Europe impacted North African countries and other West Asian Arab countries particularly. Because many of these countries, whether it is Libya or Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, or even Syria and Lebanon, are closely economically linked with Europe through various agreements. And when this meltdown started, this is one of the crucial reasons for the Arab Spring, whose reverberations are still being felt in many countries of the region. So in that way, the COVID pandemic also, we have to keep in mind, it has affected severely the political management, the economic survival strategies, and also the psychological scars, which would take many months to for the governments and the leaders to heal. The second is the hotspots which continue to bother people, regimes, and the outside world. Number one I have in mind is the Syrian crisis. He has dealt with extensively the genesis, the regional environment, the global environment. But I'm worried about the Biden administration renewed interest in supporting the rebels against President Bashar al-Assad, especially Anthony Blinken, who was the point man for Syria during the earlier Obama administrations. So the Syrian crisis is going to fester much longer. And the instability which it has caused not only for Syria but also for the region, I think would multiply. Not to speak of the new wave of refugees who are fleeing. The second is the continuing Yemeni crisis. Despite the so-called UAE's withdrawal to the south, or taking less interest and more in maritime affairs surrounding Yemen, the Saudi military intervention continues, and the killing of civilians and destruction of infrastructure is adding to the problems of Yemeni people who have suffered too long, not only because of the military intervention, but also because of the Houthi and South Yemeni problems between the north and south. So whatever little infrastructure is left is again being destroyed and crippled with the people, like earlier what happened in Somalia, being forced to live on handouts of the external funding agencies. And I'm afraid that since both the parts of Yemen have maritime borders, Red Sea and near the Bab al-Mandab and Gulf of Aden, this may become another Somalia with piracy and maritime issues coming to the prominence. The third one is some of the issues which were raised during the Arab Spring continue to haunt the people, the leaders, and the outside world. None of the states have seen. Tunisia for a while saw stability, but again it has degenerated into dictatorship of an elected president and the continuing civil war and killings in Libya. And the dictatorship in Egypt, which continues to disregard its own people and violation of human rights and lack of democracy, not to speak of any basic rights which even military dictators grant to their own citizens. It's a very repressive situation in Egypt, although Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad has appreciated Sisi's active diplomacy in Africa, but there is hardly anything he can show. The domestic roots of a successful foreign policy of a country is how it treats its own people, how it solves its own citizens' problem, whether it is unemployment or social problems or inflation or creation of jobs and security and so on and so forth. In all of these parameters, not only Egypt and its dictators have failed, but it's a sad scene in much of the region, including Iran and Saudi Arabia. The other hotspots not finding mention is the enormous pressure on Lebanese people. They are not only under pressure from a lack of government or the domination by Hezbollah, but also Israel and Syria and Turkey and the Gulf countries and the United States and France in particular have been squeezing the Lebanese people so much, but the world is silent about their agony, their pain, their suffering, which might explode in one way or the other. Then, of course, the old festering Arab-Israeli conflict and how continuous bombardment of the Gaza Strip is creating unspeakable problems faced by the Palestinians who are blockaded and suffering for so long. These also are all hotspots which would show signs of renewed intifada, for example, even in West Bank, where the Abbas PA is under fire for adopting repressive policies. So an explosive situation has reached in the West Bank and Gaza, which even the Naftali Bennett government may not be able to contain in the future, given the plight of the Palestinians, as also the Israeli citizens who are Palestinians in Israel proper, who are under tremendous pressure for various reasons. So lack of democracy and the dictatorial role of the monarchies and the continuous violation of human rights in all of these countries across the board and the internally displaced people, whether it is in Iraq or Syria or Libya or in Yemen or other countries or to external countries, borders in Europe, particularly the sad drowning of people in the Mediterranean and the hundreds and thousands which are living in forest and very difficult circumstances in EU borders. All these are also developments which need to be kept in mind. The Abraham, of course, have taken us through Bahrain, through Morocco and Jordan, and Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad brilliantly gave us the inside picture of why Saudi Arabia has not followed these countries. But the internecine fighting within the Saudi ruling family and the desire of the crown prince to have control over the political affairs, they are not signs of stability as we have seen Saudi Arabia for decades. There is bound to be turmoil not only because of this fight within the family, but also because of the restlessness of the Shias in the eastern part where bulk of the oil is located, and also the very inhuman decisions in the southwest where Yemenis are being expelled on a daily basis, hundreds and thousands from Jeddah through Asir, Najran, and Sharura and other places are being literally expelled, hounded from these Saudi territories, although they have been living in these areas because these regions belong to Yemen in the first place, which were occupied by the Saudis during and after the First World War. So Yemen is also a very important area of concern if we survey the recent developments along with Syria and Libya. The other thing which one should note is the non-state actors. It is not just Hamas or Hezbollah, but the several non-state actors in Iraq which are fighting for an end to American presence there, for an end to Saudi Gulf interventions in Iraqi affairs, or to the Iraqi Turkish support to the Kurds or intervention. So Iraq is also boiling to a large extent because of all of these non-state actors who have access to sophisticated weapons. We have seen their attacks on American bases for the last more than 1 year. The other area of concern is the election of new president in Iran, Raisi. Whether he will follow some of the policies which Hassan Rouhani had initiated, whether his attitude towards the JCPOA will remain the same, or he will turn out to be another Ahmadinejad destabilizing the region and the Iranian politics, that remains a question mark, especially given the recalcitrant attitude of the United States towards rejoining or conditional rejoining on the JCPOA and Iran's demand for lifting of all sanctions and guarantees that United States will be committed to this nuclear agreement. And also the enrichment of the uranium, which has raised concern in the IAEA and European and American circles also, how far Iran can go in its quest for its nuclear program. The Saudi-Iranian struggle, of course, has destabilized the region on a number of issues. But at the heart of it, in the future, I think it has already started, would be the oil prices. How much Iran can produce oil to regain its world market, and how much Saudi Arabia can produce to shore up its economic resources. Already we have seen Saudi Arabia and UAE spat on this issue or the quotas. So the Saudi-Iranian issues will be less of ideology and more of economic struggle. in the future. And also, I think Iran has kept a low profile in some of the areas where it is accused of meddling in the Arab countries. So in that way, the economic issues will likely dominate in the coming years between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There are many other issues about how Jordan got destabilized because of the Kushner intervention, the deal of the century, and how it is slowly recovering in the background of alleged coup attempt, which Saudi Arabia is supposed to have taken interest, or the continuous demonstrations against the rulers in Algeria, and also the fragile governments in Morocco. All of these raise eyebrows about the larger issue of political stability, about how monarchs or dictators can manage the affairs of these people. The weapons which Gaddafi had accumulated, of course, have reached as far as beyond Sahel to Nigeria and destabilized the entire region. And we have been witnessing daily killings from Mali to Niger to other Sahel countries, and how the non-state actors or armed groups in Syria get training or inspiration from the disturbed areas in Libya also is a matter of concern, and how this might reach beyond the countries which we are witnessing. As far as challenges are concerned, I agree with Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad that for the last 1.5 years, the Narendra Modi government has lost steam as far as its earlier interest in foreign policy, especially in this region, was concerned. You know, Modi's high-profile visits to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, and the awards he received, and the applause and support of the Indian diaspora there were headlines, along with the promises of investments from Saudi UAE to the extent of 70 billion, and Saudi Arabia similar amount. Nothing much is heard about in the strategic cooperation. And I'm also at pain that we have strategic cooperation with these countries who are adding problems to our own interest in this region. UAE is punching above its weight from Libya to Egypt to Tunisia to Syria to Somalia to Yemen and Iraq and Iran. And we are still strategic partners, raising not a single voice against its oppressive policies, interventions in Yemen or in other theaters. Same goes with Saudi Arabia. Does our strategic partnership force us to remain silent and what these autocrats, monarchs, or emirates do in this region, which add to our anxiety, to our problems, where Indians are involved, where we have to evacuate from these trouble spots. So these strategic partners, in fact, have become problem creators, not only in our relations with Iran, but also to our relationship, which spans decades in Yemen or in Libya or in other countries. The core issues, of course, remain. That is our dependence on chemical fertilizers from this region for our food security, our dependence on energy, oil and gas from the Gulf partners particularly, and the welfare of the Indian workers, trade, investment. But my concern lately has been on the maritime security. The earlier problem of piracy from Somalia, we have somehow managed along with other countries to stem that. But the new security concerns or the continuous attack by Iran and Israel on each other's ships, or even other partners' ships, where India also has been affected. So this unspoken war, maritime war between these two regional powers, is adding concerns to our own maritime attention. And of course, the former British Foreign Secretary identified the non-resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict as the source of violence or terrorism in this region. And that goes beyond saying anything. But the interventions by Russia in Syria and its duplicitous policy with Israel and some of the other countries also raise eyebrows, not to speak of the new Chinese interest in Iran, along with Pakistan, how this is going to shape or impact our relations, not only with Iran, but also with Afghanistan, with Central Asia, or even the Gulf countries. And the continued NATO denial in some of these countries, especially Libya, is a cause of concern. Turkey, of course, has been trying to find space for itself from Qatar to Syria to Iraq to Libya and Somalia, etc., etc. And not to speak of its hostile comments on Kashmir and the renewed ties with Pakistan. But Turkey's actions or involvement should not so much bother Indian policymakers as it would bother the West Asian and North African countries where it is identifying itself with a particular brand of Islam, which is not appreciated. Lastly, how our membership as a non-security council permanent, as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council, how we can utilize or the few days left as presidency, whether India could and should take initiatives to resolve some of these hotspots problems like Yemen, Syria, or Libya, or even the Nile waters dispute, or even the Iran-US conflict. We have to, or Lebanon, or the old Arab-Israeli conflict, all of these hotspots are not going to remain as they are. At times they explode and they surprise not only policymakers here, but all of us. And this region is prone for turmoil, prone for revolutions, sudden wars, and unprecedented agitations spilling over from one territory to the other. So this area is like a minefield, and walking through for a country like India is extremely difficult, whether it is the Shia-Sunni sectarian divide over Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, or the other countries like Bahrain and Syria and Lebanon, but also over the accumulation of weapons, both by states and non-state actors, because this region is one of the heaviest importers of weapons from all countries, from China to Russia to European Union to America, even Brazil, or even South Africa. All the countries want to export and get foreign exchange from these countries. So this region is flush with weapons. And now with nuclear plants emerging in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, or Turkey, for what purpose and what direction these nuclear programs would head, and how the present nuclear program of Iran will be addressed by not only UN agencies, but also great powers which have signed the JCPOA is a matter of concern. I would broadly agree with Ambassador Iran on Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad on Iran, that our policy has been mostly a reaction to the fear of America and its sanctions. Although I feel that there was no need to go to this extent, and we could have learned something from China or Russia or even Turkey, which is doing brisk business with Iran. our interest, our on and off interest in Chabahar, and the lack of trust between these two countries is going to be a major challenge in the coming years, because I feel that trust is not there in Indo-Iran bilateral relations. We may speak about civilizational ties and so on and so forth, but for all practical purposes, the level of trust from the Iranians is much less, however much the external affairs minister might try. So in that way, Iran is getting closer to China, maybe to Pakistan or to Russia in the future. And if the American Biden administration continues to drag its feet on the JCPOA and sanctions, and continues to be beholden to UAE or Saudi Arabia or to Israel, this may not help much to facilitate Indo-Iranian relations. I also agree. In fact, I was a critic of Talmiz Ahmad's earlier proposal for a robust Indian active leading role in the security of the Gulf. Because I remember after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the Kuwaitis were the first to come to Delhi with the draft defense agreement. We roundly rebuffed them, and we signed defense cooperation agreement later on with Qatar, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, with Oman, which doesn't mean anything to us or to them, except in the field of extradition of known criminals. Nothing much has happened. They were expecting much more, which countries like Turkey and others, Israel are filling. We are nowhere, anywhere near the security interest to look into the security interest of these Gulf countries. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Pasha. It's like, again, coming back to your classroom. So it has been really, really wonderful listening to Professor Pasha and also Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. Of course, West Asia is not a monolith. It has so many different problems and challenges, and also how countries are interacting with one another in the region, and also India's opportunities, and in fact the missed opportunities, I would say, in the words of Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, that we have lost the shine in the region, as was earlier purported by the Modi government. So I'll just take a few questions. In fact, some of these have been, some of the questions that I had was already covered by Professor Pasha. So I'll take a few questions for Ambassador and club them together for you, sir. What is the need for the US to meddle in West Asia's affairs? It is a long drawn process for us to understand. And also, how do you think the United Nations will be able to solve this Afghanistan crisis, considering most of the funding of United Nations comes from the US and it has itself withdrawn from Afghanistan? And here, if I can add to it, what do you see the role of the OIC? It hasn't much spoken about the whole dilemma that has been created by the withdrawal. So if you could talk about that. And very recently, The Economist has come out with a very interesting article which says that failure in Afghanistan shows that America's efforts have always centered around creating corrupt client states. Why is it so? Would you agree with this? And how would you respond to this, basically? So if you could take these questions. And another question is, yes, sir, please go ahead. Sir, please unmute. Ambassador, if you could unmute yourself.
Let me answer two questions together. America's approach to countries is to create client states, and the other linked with it, why is the United States in West Asia? If you go back, United States was a very reluctant to get into West Asia. Even during the Cold War, the United States used to feel that West Asia belongs to the British, and they didn't want to get involved. Their only interest was at that time their companies were developing the oil in Saudi Arabia. But as the British abruptly announced that they were withdrawing east of Suez, the Americans had no choice. And therefore, their approach was very cautious, very reluctant, because they used to argue that, look, we don't know the region. We don't know the language, we don't know the history, we don't know the culture, we are not familiar with their faith, etc. And what are we going to do? So they came in, what they had, what was called over the horizon presence, and they allowed Saudi Arabia and Iran to manage the upholding of Western interests. Now, the Americans defined their interest in the region in 3 points. Number one, free flow of oil and free availability of oil. Number one. Number two, security of Israel. And number three, ensuring that this region does not come under the control or influence of any entity, either domestic or foreign, that is hostile to Western interests. These were their three principles. I think more or less these principles have remained in place, but they have been certain, sometimes one issue is emphasized over the other. Now, it's with regard to client states. Actually, as you know, these Gulf countries that emerged as a result of the withdrawal of the British, they were inherently unstable and insecure. If you recall the various interventions, cartographic interventions that occurred as the British withdrew, number one, the creation of Pakistan, number two, the creation of Israel, and number three, the creation of the Gulf Sheikdoms, none of these was ever expected to be independently secure. They were expected to be continuously dependent on an affiliation with the Western Alliance, and it was the British Alliance. Therefore, it is not so much client states; these are dependencies. They're dependent states because they do not have even the modicum of capacity or capability of looking after themselves. Look at the entities that were created. The very small size of these entities. Number two, very small population base. In three countries, UAE, Bahrain, and Qatar, it's the Indians who are in the majority. In UAE, Emiratis are 12%, Indians are 60%. So, and you have not only, they were created to supply oil and to ensure that Western interests are safeguarded. Therefore, right from the beginning, the region was under Western control. During the Cold War, at the height of the republics, you found that there was a divide between the traditional monarchies and the republic. But after the 67 war, it ceased to be relevant, and the principal role player in the region became Saudi Arabia and the traditional monarchy. And from 1973, when the oil revenues came in, again, it became very important. You can critique the American policy on several bases, but when you come to post-Cold War, US policy was determined by two forces in play, which reinforced each other. Number one, the hubris of a hyperpower, a sole superpower. The United States lacked the experience, the maturity and the wisdom to handle this unique situation in world affairs, to bring gravitas to and responsibility to this unique role that had been thrust upon it. It was hubris. Second, the extraordinary influence on US policy that came to be exercised by the Israel lobby. Israel lobby, you see the beginning of the neocons at that time, where they had penetrated, Israel lobby had penetrated every aspect of US life. And therefore, you see after that, from then till more or less today, US policies have been influenced by Israel and by the Israeli interest getting priority over US interest. So you find, for example, the dual containment. Even at that time when dual containment of Iraq and Iran was enforced, a lot of people said that why are we taking two enemies on for no rhyme or reason? None of them affects us. Iraq was already emasculated. Then you have the war on Iraq. The war on Iraq became a priority, indeed an obsession for the neocons. Confrontation with Iran, an obsession with the neocons. So, and that neocons, even though there is no George Bush Jr. anymore, their influence remains because they penetrated very deep into the Republican Party. And the Republican Party has got an extremely hard right element, which is which was the support base for Trump. Could the American policy now change? You see, the third point, before I go forward, sorry, many of the interventions that the Americans made, largely to subserve the interests of the neocons and the Israel lobby in general, they were very ill thought out. Nobody, you see, every time you take a major action, diplomatic or military, you have to think through A, what are my objectives? B, what is the time frame? C, what are the resources that I have to bring to bear? And number 4, what is my exit strategy? If you look at the history relating to US intervention, both in Afghanistan as well as with regard to Iraq, you see none of these are spelled out. No US administration ever had any clarity about what they were doing in Afghanistan. So rather than becoming a client state, you found that there were actually massive insurgencies. None of them ever became a client state. The Taliban were back in Afghanistan within 2 or 3 years after the destruction of the Emirates. And at no stage were the Americans ever able to control Pakistan. You have to ask yourself the question that if a country is going to spend $2 trillion, should it not build assets and relationships by itself? Till the last day, till Doha, till the Doha agreement, the Americans continued to depend on the Pakistanis to deliver the Taliban. Americans had no direct contact with the Taliban at all. And they were depending on a country whose interest and American interest did not coincide at all. It was actually getting funding for the Americans, which is used on the Taliban, and Taliban then shot the Americans. A very weird, very bizarre situation. Then what were the Americans doing there? What were the resources? You never knew about the resources. A general would come. The president would want to withdraw. The general would come and say, do the search. The Americans at one time had 150,000 soldiers. And then they brought them down to 8,500. The entire discussion now at Doha was about these 5,000 soldiers. When 150,000 could not do anything, what are 5,000 going to do? Big deal. Iraq, exactly the same failure. So it's not a business of client state. It was the total inability to control any of the territories that they invaded. The others were not clients, they were dependencies. There was no way they were going to ever function on their own. Now, with regard to the question about UN and OIC, both are totally non-functional and have no role to play. The United Nations is supposed to provide some degree of welfare. I think they have done that job. They have no political role whatsoever in that country. Now, OIC, there is always a question relating to OIC, and I must clarify it to your listeners. The OIC is a bogus institution. It has only been set up by the Saudis. It is funded by the Saudis. It is located in Saudi Arabia and is controlled by the Saudis only to provide political support for the various decisions that Saudi Arabia takes from time to time. And in return, Saudi Arabia allows all members total freedom to abuse a non-member. So what Pakistan does is to use the OIC platform to abuse India. But from the day the OIC was constructed, was set up in 1968 after the Rabat conference, 1971, I think 71, it became formal. It has not contributed anything to any trouble spot anywhere in the world. In fact, I would go so far as to say it has done nothing for the interests of the Muslim community or for the member countries that have joined it. Saudi Arabia has also ensured that the OIC will never experience any revamping or reform. So it's, according to me, an inert and bogus organization. and it is incapable. It only passes very long document. It has of resolution, so-called resolutions. Many of these resolutions are not even discussed or debated in the platform of the OIC. Many countries that we used to complain to with regard to the OIC resolutions against India, they said we didn't even read these resolutions because Pakistan has a free hand in passing them. By the way, they do a lot of other countries also get that. So we are looking at a very untidy scenario. I would say that I don't think any of the major players know which way things will go. They are all watching the situation carefully. If I was sitting in Moscow or in Beijing, that is what I would do. You consult with each other. Possibly they have better representation on the ground. I would also keep a sharp eye on what the conflict is in Panjshir Valley. I'm a little skeptical about it, as I mentioned. I don't know whose adventure it is and who is behind it. You and I can make our own guess, but I don't think it's going anywhere. You remember that after the Soviets withdrew, Afghanistan experienced civil conflict for 5 years. After the Soviets withdrew, when the Afghan warlords fought with each other relentlessly, brutally, more Afghans were killed in that 5 years of civil conflict than in the entire Soviet occupation of that country. They used to do bombings, you remember, bombings of Kabul. Sustained bombardment of Kabul was done by these wretched Afghans. So that's how the Taliban came. Pakistanis created the Taliban and bring them into this. So I am skeptical about the civil conflict and I wouldn't like to see it. I'm not sure if anyone is in a position to play a role. There are role players. I think Saudi Arabia is one, Qatar is another, UAE is there, Pakistan is there. What degree of influence they actually bring to bear on the table remains to be seen. The point to emphasize is that the Taliban is not a monolithic organization. It has, for example, its number two, who is the military commander, is from the Haqqani network. Haqqani network is an extremely brutal, extremely violent, and totally independent organization. It has been fed by the ISI, but it doesn't listen to the ISI. So we have to, I think there are also reports of several thousand Pakistanis who are an integral part of the Taliban. Now, a situation of conflict is quite different from the situation in government. And it remains to be seen what kind of governments these people are going to offer. We don't have any previous experience of it, but it remains to be seen which way they will go.
Right. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. In fact, these reports are actually leading to so many conclusions that there are these Talibanis coming in the direction through, the POK, and they are already in plans to attack India and all those things.
By the way, if you let me, before you go forward, that's rubbish.
Yeah.
That's rubbish. Let's be very objective here. I know there is a discourse in India that the Taliban victory somehow threatens Kashmir. Let us get our facts together. The issue of Kashmir is from 1989. Consistent. The jihad in Kashmir is 100% controlled by Pakistan and specifically by its ISI. They will not allow anyone not under their control to enter the scenario relating to Kashmir, to Jammu and Kashmir. Everyone who does cross-border terror is managed and controlled by the ISI. Second, Taliban are not interested in cross-border activity. Taliban are a strictly national entity. Number three, is Taliban going to become a sanctuary for extremists like Al-Qaeda or whatever? The Taliban hate the Islamic State. Some of the massive attacks on Islamic State, Khorasan, were carried out by the Taliban. Yes, there may be Al-Qaeda operatives. Now, look at the map. If you had Al-Qaeda operatives, are you going to see them reaching India? I would imagine that the three countries that should be most threatened are Pakistan, China, and Russia. That's why they are there. That's what they are concerned about. Please do not highlight the issue. Now, come back to Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir is a Pakistan-managed event going on for more than 30 years. 80,000 people dead. 20,000 security officers there. There were no Taliban there. Nobody, no outsider is there. They are all Pakistanis. They were initially Kashmiris, and even now I'm told some odd Kashmiri is involved. Overwhelmingly, they are Pakistani nationals, intent on jihad, right? So I want to correct this impression very strongly that Taliban have nothing to do with India. And if I am going to say something, and that is India's problems do not lie outside its borders. All of India's problems lie within its borders. We have today, the Indian Muslim community has refused to be radicalized with all the provocations over the last 30 years. Not one Indian Muslim joined the Al Qaeda. Not one Indian Muslim ever joined the Taliban. Not only 22 Malayalis landed up in Raqqa. Only 25 people landed up in Islamic State Khorasan out of the community of 200 million. Though we've had the Kashmir Jihad for more than 30 years, from the rest of India, no Indian Muslim has joined that jihad. The Indian Muslim is not concerned about transnational jihad and is not involved with it. His total commitment is to the democratic and secular order of India. That is the thing. The concern that we should have is the term I have coined, cross-communal radicalization. That is the communalization, the communal politics, which is coming from the authorities concerned and from their ideology, is a greater danger to India than anybody who seizes power in Afghanistan. So let us not confuse ourselves with what is the real threat and what is the imagined threat.
Right, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. In fact, we really require such strong opinion because responsible and informed media is a thing that is really needed these days. So thank you so much. I'll just put one final question before we move to the final way forward round. Is that what are your views? What are your views on the US moving its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem? And India has already maintained that we are going to stay in Tel Aviv. So do you see any significance of this, or is it just a sovereign decision?
You see, for a 4-year period, the United States was a president whose mental balance is in serious doubt. And he did a series of actions, mostly thoughtless, mostly without reflection, mostly without thinking of any implications, foreign policy implications. Trump's support base consisted of two pillars. Number one, individuals, wealthy individuals who were Jewish donors, like Sheldon, Adelson, who gave him a few $100 million. Hardcore right wing. He ran a casino, made his money in the casino, but otherwise hard right and totally committed to Israel's extreme right wing. Number one. Number two were the Christian evangelists. The Christian evangelists, with deep respect to their thinking, they truly believe and they have convinced themselves that once all of Palestine becomes Jewish, it will expedite the second coming of Jesus Christ. At which time, all the Jews will either have to convert to Christianity or they will die a horrible death. So they are a support base for Israel. Israelis are not bothered about phase 2 when they are to be annihilated because they say it's not our belief. But so long as we get political support. So Donald Trump was under tremendous pressure from these donors as well as from the Christian evangelists. And that is why many of the actions that he has taken are linked with that. So the shift from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, Biden is not going to reverse it. We have to accept it as a given. What the Americans had thought long ago, when Congress passed the act in 1993, the successive US presidents have postponed the decision on security grounds. The American vague idea was that once you have a comprehensive peace agreement in the region, at that time we can address the issue of the status of East Jerusalem. What Trump has done is to reverse the thing. He has already recognized it and taken away the card that the Americans were possibly going to have. You can have your own view about how serious the Americans are ever going to be with regard to taking any important decisions relating to the future. I personally feel, and this is a very much a personal view, I personally feel that with regard to the Arab Palestine, with regard to the Israel Palestinian issue, no one else's views matter. Things will keep on happening, confrontations, violence, intimidation, cruelties. At some stage, they will have to sit together. And when will that happen? When there is a major change in Israel. Israel has still the xenophobia of Zionism. I quoted to you an American scholar who says the time for Zionism is over. This is Chas Friedman. Chas Freeman is a very distinguished American writer, and I must confess I was impressed. He said Zionism has only inculcated in Israel racism, violence, and abuse. And it's a time to give it up. Imagine a situation, and that's the El Dorado I'm looking at, that as these Israelis, particularly younger people, start engaging with Arabs and find the relationship and interaction constructive and useful and attractive, you could, and therefore they may have a different view of what their country is all about. At the moment, they have a conflict. They are conflicted. Are we Jew? Is our state Jewish or is our state democratic? The swing, the state is Jewish because of Zionism. The pathway from Zionism to democracy will give you the one state which is going to be the final solution. The solution of this problem. I don't want to use the word final solution and get it misunderstood, but it is the final settlement of this issue. Only the Israelis can deliver on this. Otherwise, you will keep on killing. And the Palestinians have never given up. Look back. From 67 till today, there has not been a single day when Israel has been at peace. Because the Palestinians, you keep on killing them and keep on killing them and keep on killing them, but they have no weaponry. They will pick up a rock, but they will not give up. So in this situation, while the Israelis keep on using firepower, which they have, I don't imagine the American attitude will change. I see them, I've studied their history, their political order. I'll tell you very frankly, I told an American this, he was shocked, but it's objectively correct. It is a dysfunctional country. It's a totally dysfunctional country because you have elections every 2 years. Therefore, no government and a presidential election every 4 years. There is no continuity in strategic perception. You saw what happened with Obama struggles with the nuclear agreement, and this idiot comes and just withdraws from it. No explanation to anybody. So it's a dysfunctional order. It is incapable of strategic thinking. It has very powerful interest groups and lobbies. And as a result, it will never have a coherent policy approach. What is the good thing that is happening is that the hubris that had emerged in the 1990s and continued in the first decade, the serious setbacks and mistakes that the Americans made has, I think, eroded the hubris. Does that mean that it will remain like this? Perhaps not. The second thing is the rise of China. And the China and Russia working together, they will become the constraint, the restraint on this. I have written in my book, this tormented wild beast. You see, after 9/11, the way they conducted themselves is like, oh, you've shot me. You lost 3,000 people. No American knows that Al-Qaeda was created by the Americans. When I told this to certain Americans just after 9/11, they were stunned because they had been told to believe there's something seriously wrong with Islam and the Arabs. And I told them that it's your country which funded this organization. You used jihad against, for a political purpose. You brought 100,000 Muslims abroad to the Pak-Afghan border. Who funded it? It's the Americans and the Saudis. So they don't know history. They have no knowledge of politics, no knowledge of culture, and yet they have this massive military power which they unleash upon these countries, savagely damage them. But you will see, not once have they succeeded. Every intervention of theirs has ended in defeat. By defeat, I mean that you had certain objectives, you failed. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, all of these great superpowers. So today that superpower is diminished and has lost credibility.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So we'll now move to the way forward and the concluding remarks. And I would invite Professor Pasha to talk about how are we looking and acting West. What are your recommendations to intensify our Act West strategy, if at all there is any, and also what is the possibility for the situation of peace and cooperation in West Asia? And also you touched a little bit about the non-permanent membership of India. If you could point out some bullets about how India could harness its position as this non-permanent member. And also because China is all over, China and Russia, in fact China more, is all over the region. How should India adopt its strategies? Should it make its presence felt more enthusiastically and with more vigor than what it already is? And or should we just continue our engagement in the manner it is at present? So if you could talk a little bit about these points and your concluding remarks as to the way forward. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me take up the last point about India's membership as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Just as we took initiative a week ago on Afghanistan, convening as president the special meeting, emergency meeting on Afghanistan, where you had fairly good discussion and opening remark by the UN Secretary General. But later on, I hear that Russia and China wanted Pakistan also to be invited for the discussion, which India was not open for. So the Indo-Pak problems have acted as a constraint on what we can pursue at the high table at the UN Security Council, even as president of the council for a month. You see, India has been aspiring to be a permanent of the UN Security Council. We need to go beyond the petty Indo-Pakistan disputes and its spillover on our larger role. We tend to see whether it is in Afghanistan as a zero-sum game. If Pakistan has an edge there, it is a loss for us, or in other areas with China. We need to come out of this box and see ourselves as an important player in global affairs. I don't want to remind listeners of what we did when we were not so much economically well off or as nuclear power in the 50s and 60s. We did take interest and played an active role from Congo to Vietnam to Korea, and in the nuclear arms race, diplomacy, so on and so forth. So I don't see any reason why India should not take up at the UN Security Council in consultation with both its friends and critics. I don't see any reason why India should not take interest in convening a meeting on Yemen, for example, or Syria, for example, or even Libya. You see, all the UN envoys and approaches have not really worked, but if something alternative proposal from a non-Western state like India, if it comes, working paper which can be developed on all of these hotspots, not to speak of other areas of interest in the global arena, it will enhance our own acceptability, credibility, and the enormous influence we have, having got elected several times as non-permanent member. So India should rise above this local subcontinental frictions and have creative, I'm sure there are brilliant diplomats in the MEA and outside the MEA who would give ideas how to go about, but the lack of political will on the part of this government is a sorry state of affairs. Whether it is our relations with Iran or with UAE or Saudi Arabia or any part of this region or beyond, we tend to give the impression that we are behaving like a small state, not as a responsible big Asian power with long years of interest, experience in diplomacy, in our rich culture, civilizational heritage, and a huge country. We are not we should not give the impression that our foreign policy is subordinated to the United States on critical issues where it affects our national interest. So what I would suggest is we need to have an independent, autonomous foreign policy with regular interactions. In the first 4 years, the Modi government was active, visiting here, there, but suddenly they have lost interest. There was a spat with Saudi Arabia, then we had problems with Turkey, or with other countries. We have lost interest of Egypt and other countries. So this zigzag policy, inconsistencies, and ad hoc approaches with no clear vision is a bane for foreign policy. There needs to be sustained interest at the highest level. Imagine a country like Turkey. It invites the Ethiopian Prime Minister for talks on Nile. What prevents us from taking interest on such issues, whether it is Yemen or other countries of direct interest to us, or Syria, which has been ravaged, which impacts many countries in this region. So I am disappointed as an Indian, as a specialist on international affairs, that we need to pursue a much more energetic foreign policy, especially in an area of Gulf region, West Asia, which is of great importance to us. What happens there, whether it is high oil prices, which impacts our budget, our inflation, our people, or the wars there, which has led to oil shocks, or the Arab Spring, or the revolutions, which leads to violence, extremism. All these things we need to very carefully monitor, and we need to have people monitoring regularly on this area. The UGC had started a Gulf Studies program, which was the only one in India, in JNU, located here. And for lack of funds, they have closed it for the last 3 years. It is a matter of shame that a country like India doesn't have a few thousand rupees to support a program which is of great importance given our nearly 8 million workers there, and 80% dependence on energy from this region, or trade over $100 billion, and extremely important from security, stability, and maritime perspective. So that is my take on UN and what India could do, should do. The other related point is, unless, as Ambassador pointed out, we put our house in order, all these hiccups about the policy ideological differences, the communal politics, and various avoidable things of polarization in the Hindu-Muslim community, and CIA, and unnecessary provocations. All this leads us to problems in our interaction with even our friends. You see the social media in Gulf countries, how critical it is of the NDA government or BJP government, and its some of the controversial policies to which Ambassador alluded to, especially the Afghan CAA, Hindu, Sikhs, and etc. So India's domestic problems need to be, as Prime Minister Vajpayee pointed out, we should not create a situation in the domestic arena which will force us to bow our heads in front of other countries. He was very right, and unless we put our house in order, others will not take us seriously, whether it is on Afghanistan or in the Gulf affairs or in the larger international arena. We have to act wisely domestically and project ourselves as a responsible power. We have to live up to our own traditions. We claim to be the largest democracy, but still, if we do things which are seen as undemocratic or violation of human rights, it will be questioned at the international level. What is our commitment as a permanent veto building power at the UN? Secondly, I have a slightly different take on US-Israeli relations, which Ambassador pointed out. You see, basically, I agree with him that domestic changes in Israel will impact on how it shapes its relations with Palestinians. But my own understanding is that, you see, until and unless the United States uses its leverage over Israel, Israeli leaders are not going to listen. Whether it is military aid, economic aid, political support, or at the UN or at the global level, the crucial UN support is now being increasingly questioned, whether it is in Congress or the military aid or how Israel uses its American weapons or the billions of dollars as economic aid and its policy towards the Palestinians, not only in occupied territories, but also within Israel. So even in the American universities, I was a Fulbright scholar in Minnesota State University there. I've seen how even in universities, large number of Americans, whites, who are otherwise very supremacist and others, they have become fed up with blind support to Israel. And many groups have emerged among the academics, in the press, and in the larger society. And that is reflected in the number of people who get elected to the Congress, whether it is of Arab origin or members who can speak up, like Bernie Sanders, and a large number of growing numbers in the House and in the Senate. So American blind support has emboldened Israel to commit the monstrous policies not only against the Palestinians, but also against Iran, against many other actors, whichever is seen as a threat to Israel. So just as people are talking about declining American power and its inability or its withdrawal syndrome from the Gulf region and elsewhere, as indicated by its withdrawal from Afghanistan. It is committed to withdraw from Iraq by the end of this year, and general non-involvement. So all of this shows that the future of US-Israeli ties also is going to be increasingly questioned, and that will shape or it should shape how Israel acts within Israel on its occupied territories and how it threatens other countries in the Gulf region. Of course, US has discredited itself and invited the anti-Americanism, which is universal in this region. And it is, as I pointed out, the undemocratic rulers who are dependent on the American security political support use force and repression to remain in power. As far as the last point is concerned, how peace can be brought to this region, you see, unless and until we identify the core hotspots, whether it is the non-resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict or the continued regime change attempts by the United States and Europe in Iran or Syria or Libya or other countries, the outside interference is a bane. And this has to be checked unless grassroots movements or NGOs and support to democratic forces is not given. The transition from these repressive dictators would continue to destabilize this region. Imagine in Oman, the Arab Spring took place there, but hardly reported during the Sultan Qaboos period, and he tried to change the ministers and give economic benefits, but that did not solve the problem. Now there is a raging problem because of the low oil prices, and Oman is not a major oil exporting country. Similarly, is the case in Bahrain, or the Saudis themselves are facing the crunch of low oil prices along with other countries. So in that way, the oil prices also, along with lack of democracy, is going to be a problem. And this uncertainty over American approach towards Iran is allowing China, Russia, Turkey, and other countries to fish in troubled waters. I don't think Turkey would have taken such a big leap, or China would have gone beyond what it is doing in Iran, signing a 25-year agreement with Iran, which would impact Indo-Iranian relations and bring Pakistan and Iran also closer. But beyond that, Chinese are very, very active, and we seem to take it lightly. It is going to be a major challenge in the coming decades, given the consistent approach of the Chinese to isolate, to encroach, to strengthen their presence in each and every country. Wherever we are there, they are slowly pushing step by step, and we might end up in the coming years being worried about why we did not think and take concrete steps towards China by using our influence in these countries where people look towards India, whether it was Saudi Arabia or UAE or Bahrain or Oman. All these countries wanted India to take an active role in variety of fields. But we seem to have lost steam. We seem to have lost interest. And we give the impression that our policy is influenced by Israel or America, or our own incompetence as far as our approach to this region is concerned. So the rise of China is, for me, a very important factor in the coming years, which will be a major challenge to our diplomacy, because America has convinced itself that they have burnt their fingers very badly in this region. And by their identification, they have discredited themselves. And this is paving the way for, in a very aggressive way, the expansion of Chinese influence, from arms sale to economic benefits to pushing aggressively BRI, sending their own workers in this region, and making this as a hub for their forays in Africa and beyond. I think it's a matter of great concern. We don't seem to have really taken this approach of the Chinese in the right spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Very important points you raised, and thank you very much for those way forward and how we can achieve peace. So I would now invite Ambassador for his concluding remarks. And sir, if you could also touch upon your policy recommendations on India's engagement with West Asia. So please unmute.
With regard to the events in the region, I think we have covered them very comprehensively. And we have given a very good overview of the stresses and tensions that are prevailing. Overall, there are many areas of uncertainty. We do not know which way the Biden administration will shape its foreign policy. They do not have even senior officers in place. They do not have most of their ambassadors in place. They seem to be floundering. In these early days, the administration has not shone with efficiency. And there is a near total absence of clarity with regard to a strategic vision. What you hear about, is something which need not have been emphasized the way it has been. Our top priority is China. A principal challenge is China. But that was well known and well. You don't have to announce it. What are you planning to do with China? You have to engage with that country. So the first days have not been particularly impressive. I think that the Chinese-Russian relationship has got a lot of resonance, and I think it has strengthened itself. They have prepared a very solid base for their presence and control of events in what I have called Eurasia. I've written an academic paper on the subject, but I have identified in that very strong relations they have put together with Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. If you look at the map, there's a contiguous territorial space. They are also very, very actively involved in West Asia. So we have to watch that situation as well. With regard to India, both Dr. Pasha and I have agreed that the government has not inspired much confidence. It seems to have taken its eye off. It is so robustly focused on forthcoming elections. It's like an obsession. Hardly is one election over, the next one may be a year away, but already they are in election mode and are doing everything possible. Some of the most damaging things because they're connected with an election. The manipulation of rules, some of the statements, beating up of certain people, etc. All of this linked with elections. So that is, it is not very impressive. And I must say, and I agree with Dr. Pasha here, look, people are watching you. They don't have to always say things, but there is a deep-seated sense of concern about the way India is going. Now, I'm going to say something which will be very painful. Nobody takes India seriously anymore. Many times at seminars and conferences, people say, oh, what do you think so-and-so will think about India? I said, they don't even think about India because India has withdrawn from the arena. Therefore, India's views don't count. Which views have we articulated on any subject which could be taken seriously by somebody? Which initiative and activity have we done? I mentioned to you Chabahar. Chabahar was 2003. Can we not, if I have a relationship with the Americans, do I not have the capacity to tell the Americans, look, we can only be a strategic partner if we are equal. And equality means mutual respect. I am not your client state. And you have to be sensitive to my interests. I live in this region. You are far away. You have domestic compulsions to have this maximum pressure on Iran. Why is it applicable to me? You don't want to do business with Iran, please don't. But I depend on Iran. I have got energy connectivity. I have trade and investment links, and I have the strategic projects. And then they said, okay, you can do Chabahar. But who will come when you have got the secondary, extremely onerous secondary sanctions? Who is going to come? Nobody came. Nobody bid for your tenders. And Chabahar withered away. So a major strategic partnership was, I think, lost. Iranians are much too sophisticated to say to your face that you let us down. But let us sit back and see our own conduct and see where we have gone. And today you have seen for the last 2 years, there is no serious foreign policy. So I have no recommendations to make because you are no longer a serious country. You are, and this agenda at home, every distinguished Indian has said that India's greatness is connected with its unity and its celebration of its pluralistic and multicultural heritage. Absent that, you will be in a constant state of conflict. And you become completely inward looking as a result. And that is not the model that India had. I pointed out to many students various times. If you look at the heritage of India, India has always been a connected country, connected people. I said Indian Ocean is called Indian Ocean not because India existed. India never existed. But because Indians were constantly moving back and forth for 4,000 years. The remains of Harappa in Oman There are remains from India in Bahrain. They have found the presence of Indian mathematicians in Sumeria. We were there during the Egyptian civilization, and the same thing obtained in the eastern side. We are a connected people. Look at the old Silk Road. The old Silk Road was an Indian road. It went from Xi'an to Aleppo, to Antioch, but Indian merchants were all over Central Asia. Every part of India was linked to the old Silk Road. Indian silks found their way to Rome. So anyway, also today we have, while we are all students of foreign affairs and we wish our country well, there used to be a time when we used to be actively involved in writing papers, writing articles, which had an India-centric role. That India could do this, India could do that. We would attend meetings and say India could do. Today, all of that has gone. I myself, who used to be so actively promoting India's role in bringing peace to West Asia, I would be ridiculed. I would be laughed out of the room. Saying, what are you talking about? India doesn't even know where these countries are located. So, and this revamping of the idea of India to suit a certain political agenda, we are going to seriously damage. It could be reversed, and it will be reversed at some stage. But the point is, look at the damage it will leave behind and the time lost. Dr. Pasha spoke about the pandemic. Look at the pandemic, how it has wreaked havoc. The main interest over here appears to be to cover up. It is one of the most abysmal handling of one of the greatest tragedies that we have faced in recent times. But it's as far as the people in power are concerned, it is a media challenge, not a health challenge, not an economic challenge, not a social challenge. It's how to manipulate the media and project a positive image. If that is the way we are going to go, then I think we have a very, very bleak future. And the world is not waiting. I pointed out this business of Eurasia. Russia and China have been working on it for the last 5 years, systematically engaging with countries, going there, discussing things, seeing what you can do with each other. This, when you have an agreement, it's a result of many years of effort, diplomatic effort, bringing in your top people at the right time, the foreign minister, Lavrov, Putin. These are people who are all over the place. So let me stop here. It's a litany of dissatisfaction and deep unhappiness. But there we are, and we have to say it. And people of my age and background don't say this, and I don't know who else is going to say it. Nobody in the media is saying any of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for sharing your views. And definitely, we need to be more proactive, and let us hope for the best. That's what I could say. So thank you. And I now come to the end of this very, very seamless, enriching, in fact, comprehensive, as you just pointed out, and very candid discussion on recent developments in West Asia, implications for India. So on behalf of, I would like to formally propose the vote of thanks. On behalf of IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, I thank our speaker, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad, for delivering this distinguished lecture. We really learned a lot from you, sir, and our eminent Professor Abdul Kamal Pasha, Aftab Kamal Pasha, sorry. And your views, it was so important that it has further intensified the need to study the whole region so passionately. And our attendees here watching us on Zoom and also on Facebook Live, we have really learned a lot. And in fact, we couldn't have asked for more with such distinguished speakers speaking today on the area that they really specialize on. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone who would be watching this program later on YouTube, and also listening to this on our different podcasts. So thank you so much for your time. And we are really grateful to both our speakers, Ambassador Ahmad and Professor Pasha. So wish you all a very good evening and good night. Please take care of yourselves. Thank you, sir.